It is my pleasure to welcome Rich Tackenberg, Managing Director at Sucherman, one of the leading search firms. Rich has been at Sucherman for 6 years, but been in the search game for almost 15. Before that, he had a production company, and he was also, Rich, I hope you'll take this in the spirit I mean it, but you were in digital before digital was cool.
Yes.
You were there at the very, very beginning. And I have to say, I don't know who they are, but I know that Rich has placed more C-level execs than he can probably count. I wouldn't really know Rich, but we were on a panel together, and I'm very happy that I met him so he can be with us here today and demystify this world of executive search. So Rich, thank you, and appreciate you being here.
Of course, happy to be here. This is really fun stuff to talk about.
So first, I've got to ask you, just right out of the gate, as an executive recruiter, tell us a little bit about what that entails and specifically the process of what you might go through when you get an assignment from a company and then you have to figure out what kind of potential candidates you're looking for.
Sure. Probably the biggest misconception is people will say to me lovingly, like, oh, you help people get jobs. And I wish that were the case, but it's actually the opposite. We help companies find people to fill important positions with the best person possible. Part of that is that we will, someone will get a job. If I talk to 100 people for a search, 99 will not get the job and only one will. So, that's sort of, we look at it from a different perspective. Usually now we'll get brought on by media companies, whether it's a big media company, a studio, a cable network, an SVOD service, a technology company that touches content, a sports company that touches content. Usually they've tried to fill the position on their own and they haven't had luck. So they bring in a hired gun like us to fill the position. So we really try to understand what we try to start with, obviously what is the position? And then underneath it, what I want to understand is what is the problem you're trying to solve by adding this position or changing the person in the seat? And that really tries to become our guidepost to, what are we looking for? So instead of just looking for the unicorn, because everybody looks for the unicorn, I like to look for the thoroughbred, who is a realistic potential hire that is actually going to solve the problem that you were looking to solve in the first place. So we'll do that. We have a pretty extensive database. The company's been around for 30 years and we take very diligent notes on every conversation we have. So we'll look at who do we know that might be right? Who do we know that might know people that might be right? And how do we sort of expand that list, both in diversity and inclusion, to make sure that we're seeing and showing our clients the most broad profile that we can, but also who might be interesting out of the box candidates. Out of the box is it's a triggering word for us because rarely do out of the box candidates get jobs through executive search firms because they're hiring us for the box. But often one of our jobs, I think, is to find somebody who has the prerequisite skill set, has done the prerequisite, has done the job that needs to be done, but on paper does not look as sexy as maybe they actually are. And that it becomes our job to advocate for, you may even have seen this resume in passing, but let us tell you why this person would be so great for the job. Oh. And we work on behalf of the client. So we're very full service. So from very first phone call to say, hey, Madelyn, I'm working on a job, wanted to see if you'd be interested. If not, can you recommend anyone? All the way through helping, on the interview process on both sides, staying connected to often we'll actually make the job offer and negotiate the comp package and everything. So we stay very, very tied to the candidates through the entire life cycle. We're very, very high touch. We become kind of embedded employees of the company. And, I've become very close friends with candidates, some who I've placed and some who I haven't placed, but we just had a really good experience because we stayed connected very closely.
Wow, that's interesting. You're a combination of many things. You're a middleman, you work on behalf of the company that hired you, but you're also helping the candidate look as good as he or she can. So you're sort of a full service, if you will, from the beginning all the way to the end.
Yes.
Having said that, you mentioned that sometimes someone might look good on paper, but you can help them to look even better, or you help them to present or maybe bring up certain qualities that might be a match for the job that might not be apparent at first. So let's talk about that for a minute with respect to resumes. They're extremely important. I'm sure you would agree with this. when I posted the 27 tips, I was very big on readability. Use the right font, make sure it's spaced out, focus on certain keywords, use bullet points. Don't tell your life story, just list without a lot, your life story meaning a lot of adjectives and so forth. So talk to us about that. How important is readability for someone like you that must go through stacks and stacks of them online?
Oh, it's huge. It couldn't be more important. And I want to, for a second, take a second to say that I've spent 15 years reading articles about resumes and lists and stuff. And your piece, the PDF you sent me, was the first thing that I sent to every member on my staff immediately and said, this is it. This is the piece that I felt captured it more than anything else I've ever read in 15 years. So great job. And thank you for making that. I really like it a lot. So a lot of what I would say would yes, and a lot of what you had in there, but I mean, I could spend half an hour just on that one question. I would say more than anything, as you said about readability, what I tell candidates when they're asking about their resume is, if you want to read your own resume the way that me and my clients will, open your resume on your iPhone, not your iPad, not your computer, on your iPhone, and read it, because that's the same level of attention that I or a hiring executive will read your resume on our computer, because it's just give me the facts. The idea of the resume is, I'm looking at your resume, I want to know the story of your career. And it's always going to start with, what are you doing now? Or what was your most recent job? That's going to always be, no matter how you try to position yourself, it's always going to start with, well, what are you doing now? That's my starting point. And then I'm going to work backwards and see, well, how did you get here? How did you come up? And that's going to tell the story. I know in some cases, people's story is a little unclear because they've jumped around and out of need or want or necessity, and that is what it is, and we can talk about that. But for the most part, that's what I want to get. I want to understand very quickly what you've done. And then the second piece, that the next layer I want to get out of that is, what did you do to make your employment, to make your time at those companies better? How are those companies better off for you having worked there? And if you can't quantify it, my natural assumption is going to be they weren't. So it really is behooving of you to help me understand what that is. And it gets complicated. If you're in sales, it's very easy to put numbers and metrics. And if you're the head of development, it's easy to put, what shows. But for a lot of patients, like my position, my resume, it's hard to say, especially there's a lot of stuff I can't talk about. But I do feel like that's ultimately what I want to understand quickly. And everything else becomes noise. And you telling me what your best qualities are in your life story and what kind of job you're looking for, it's just noise. It doesn't help me answer the question I'm trying to ask when I look at your resume.
Right. That's interesting, because I know some companies will say, put a lot of numbers in there about that you increased revenue, this and this upon last year. I always say, if that works, do it, but don't force it. And more importantly, that you stress the fact that you significantly increase branding of a particular thing, or that you build more of an online community. There's other ways to show
Sure.
the impact of what you did at that company versus just numbers. You agree?
Yep. I totally agree. And it depends on your job. At the end of the day, if your job is sales and revenue, then I would say you got to put the numbers down. But in so many jobs, your impact is more soft than hard. But if you can't quantify it for us, whether it's in words or numbers, no one can. It's, no one's going to advocate for you better than you. So you got to figure out, I spent 4 years at that job. How did I leave it better than I found it? Whatever that is, as you said, it could be anything, but I would try to quantify it.
Got it. So now you talked about your database. If somebody were to send you their resume, unsolicited, just random, someone sends it to you. Because I was always under the impression that when you're hired to do a search, you have ways of finding the right people, as you just discussed. But if somebody were to just send you a resume, does that just go into the big database that you have at the company? Is someone like actually looking at it? Is it a waste to do that? Is it disrespectful to send a resume unsolicited to a search firm?
Sure, I can only speak for me. I would say it's definitely not it's definitely not inappropriate to send it. It's not a bad idea, you know. And again, I should mention, because we're a retained search firm, we're only working on executive positions. So I can't speak to the cinematographer or the gaffer or the craft service person that lives a freelance lifestyle. So for me, you know, so if we get a resume unsolicited, we will look at it. We'll see immediately, does it apply to any positions we're working on right now? And if it is, we'll decide, is it someone we should reach out to? If not, we'll put it in the database. If, you know, if we're working on a search and what you did is very germane to the job we're doing, it will come up when we start a new search. So our, you know, our data inquiry process, if you are a VP of Business and Legal Affairs at a cable network and we are doing an SVP of Business and Legal Affairs, it will come up. If it's on, and then we'll go, okay, well, that's interesting. I don't know if this helps answer the question. What I always find is if your resume, if the story of your resume speaks to us, then even unsolicited will go, wow, look at what this person did. Look at the effect that this person had. That's somebody that could be interesting. If it doesn't tell the best story, then it's on the line. And often what comes to is, if somebody that we know has introduced you to us, then that touch point and the conversation we had about you becomes the deciding factor when a resume is sort of on the line. If
Oh,
it's just a cold resume and I don't know you and no one has mentioned to you me, if your background totally fits, we'll probably reach out, or at least consider, should we reach out? If we don't know anything about you and no one has ever spoken to us about you, we might decide that it's not worth it. Our time is super limited, so it may not be worth the time. So that personal connection is worth its weight in gold.
oh, fascinating. Okay. Now let me ask you about this, specifically about the resume. I've been asked this, and I would be interested in your opinion about, because there is ageism. Let's face it, there's ageism in our industry, and many people are afraid to put the year they graduated college. I was once told many years ago from actually someone in executive recruiting, that when they don't see a year, they know the person's too young or too old. Does that still apply, Rich? And how do you advise like, I know you need to know the age, and as that intermediary person, I'm sure you get it, but a person doing a resume, should they put the year they graduated if they're over a certain age?
You know, and I should say, you know, I am never allowed to ask somebody's age, and we try not to sort of go down the road of playing the guessing game if possible. You know, I am okay if it's not on the resume. It is never. I definitely feel like, especially people who've been in the game for a while, I understand that that's a factor. So I'm also in a little bit of a different situation, because generally the level of positions we're placing, age and I should say experience, is often more of an asset than a detriment. If we were placing a manager of comedy at a network, they may want sort of the kid, but a lot of the positions we're placing, they're often like, I don't know if this person is senior enough to lead this big team and if they have enough life experience. So I don't know if I'm the best person to answer, but I would
Oh,
say, if I see someone has not put their age on their resume, I'm okay with that. As far as, I know why you're doing it, I get it, and I'm okay with it. It usually doesn't bump me.
right. Good. That's good to know. Yes, I had a person I was doing a resume for, and she was only 35, and she was afraid to put the year she graduated. So, I mean, I
Yeah,
think you're right. I think we all know what it is, but we then dig further to figure it out if
right,
that's important based on
right.
experience. Let me ask you too about following up and what your take is on this. So many people would say, I haven't heard back from so and so, and should I follow up? And I sort of have the three rule, that you follow up three times and then don't follow up anymore. Many people don't get back to people when they don't get the job, and sometimes that not hearing and that rejection is hurtful. And I tell them not to take it personally. But what is your advice with respect to this? Is there, I know it's hard to have one rule, but what's your advice on this?
You know, if we have approached somebody for a job even if it's a very preliminary conversation and we have not gotten back to them, that is our bad. And it happens more often than I would like to admit, because we're imperfect people. And sometimes in our database, we code somebody the wrong way, or we mean to just sort of make the call and we don't. So I never, ever, ever have a problem with a candidate reaching back out to me to say, hey, I thought hey, whatever happened with that? Totally, totally appropriate. If I were not to respond to that, I mean, to me, I feel like if we've already had a conversation, you have every right to keep asking until you get an answer. If somebody reaches out to me to say, hey, a friend of mine told me you're working on a job and what do you think? Often, I'll have to say, if they're a great candidate, we'll engage them. Often I'll say, you know what, I just don't think so. You know what, they're looking for something very specific. It's not what you have. That doesn't mean you're not a great candidate, just not for this. And, oh, well, let me know. And in those cases, I'm rarely going to then follow up with you again to say, hey, remember when I said basically no when you cold called me? The answer
Right.
is still no. Even there, I think it's okay to reach out, but I think there you're right. It's like if someone doesn't get back to you, maybe ping them a second time. I would sort of drop it. And I think if you're just reaching out to someone, I get a lot of incoming of just like, especially on LinkedIn, hey, I'm looking for a job. I've heard great things about your company. I'd love to chat. And if I get 4 or 5 of them a day minimum, I can't respond to all of them. I certainly can't get on the phone with even a fifth of the people who reach out to me. It would become my full-time job. So there I would say, I think you're right. A second reach out, to sort of, hey, I just want to make sure you got this. Maybe a few months later, hey, hoping that maybe life's a little bit less busy. And at that point, I think it just is what it is.
I had I knew someone that on the third time they reached out, I said, rather than just following up on the job, why don't you try something like, I'm sure you've already found someone and I wish you the best of luck. Should you ever need me for anything, please let me know. And as it
Yep.
turns out, Rich, they hadn't found anybody. And it was a good reminder because enough time, it wasn't like 3 in a row, like a month had gone by. And so it just kind of worked out. So it
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily have to always be the same follow-up note. You could be a little
Yes.
creative and so forth. I wanted to bring up LinkedIn because you just mentioned that. And I want to find out from your position, how important is it? I had a friend who hadn't been on LinkedIn. He hadn't really worked it. He hasn't needed to. And now he's in between jobs and he's reluctant to just suddenly dive into it and connect with people that maybe he hasn't talked to in over 10 years. How important is it? How important is it to get that resume up there and keep it updated and cultivate that network? Can you give us your perspective?
So on my work computer, I have a keyboard shortcut that if I hit, I just type in your name and it searches you on LinkedIn, because it is probably the thing that I spend most of the time doing. Even ironically, if you're in our database, I often start with LinkedIn and then go back to the database to see if we have you and if it's updated. It is, it is, I'd say, the beginning, the middle, and the end. When I started in entertainment specifically, a lot of people wouldn't have LinkedIn, and I would say, what are you doing? And they would say, but Facebook is my LinkedIn. I know everybody. I'm already connected to everybody. And that is a vastly different world than the world we live in today. I work for many clients, whether they're consumer brands, whether they're tech companies, where the hiring executives do not come from content, they come from engineering, or they come from, or they're, CEOs that are, startup founders that have no idea who these people are. And for us and for them, LinkedIn is absolutely the language we trade in. But if I'm working on a search and I just would say, Madelyn, can you recommend someone? Do you know if anyone's good? While we're talking on the phone, I will be searching LinkedIn and keeping up each of the profiles of the people that you mention. And when I search and I don't see anybody, or I see, they started a job in 1995 and it hasn't been updated in clearly 10 years and they have 3, I just close it. There's much less of a chance of that person's going to get considered, because I can't have a conversation with you. If I open it up and I see Joe Doe, oh, they worked at this place, I can get, oh, they worked here. What do you think? And you can tell me, oh yeah, actually it was a short run, but don't worry about that. They sold the company, and we can have a conversation, and my clients and I can have conversations. So to me, it's more important. I would say LinkedIn is almost more important than a resume. That sounds crazy to say, because
Right.
it is your resume that can be accessed by anyone, anywhere, and super, super valuable.
It's very important to have a good, not headshot, but up-to-date picture on LinkedIn, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'd say it's super, super helpful. Yeah.
Good. And is there another tip that you can tell people, like, pardon me, make your resume, maybe the format of your resume, maybe a shortened version on LinkedIn, the entire version? Like, what, is there any tip you can give people about the best way to work LinkedIn?
The only thing that I think about it, the thing that I would say that comes to mind immediately is generally when I'm looking at a resume, I'm expecting that I'm going to see each prior job is going to get a little bit less space than the job before it. And, you know, your job from 10 years ago beyond is not going to be a novel. LinkedIn is very different emotionally. LinkedIn, as you sort of add pieces, there's no, I never feel like somebody has to go back and shorten up the job from 10, 15 years ago. It can be a very, very long list. And for some reason, that's okay. Not that it needs to be, but I
Right.
feel like for whatever reason, we're okay with LinkedIn being just a longer sort of piece. So that I would say that, but I'd say all the rules that you sort of have on resumes. I mean, a lot of times I'll see, you know, I'll get people who have great resumes and their LinkedIn is just their titles and one line. I'm like, I feel like you're shortchanging yourself. You're not putting your best foot forward. I
Right.
understand one of the challenges is often candidates will have different resumes for different job types and they want to send the right resume for the right job, but LinkedIn, you only get one shot. So you have to create sort of a catch-all. And that's one reason that sometimes people will be a little bit briefer because they don't want to sort of paint themselves into one position. But I think the more extensive your LinkedIn can be, certainly the better.
Got it. And then last question about LinkedIn. On your resume itself, I've advised people at the very top, your name, your cell, Los Angeles, or the city in which you live. But you don't need to put your LinkedIn handle, if you will, because anybody that is in this game knows how to access you. Would you agree?
Yeah, I don't know that I ever click on those on the resume just because I'm going to just search for your name anyway. It's just easier.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. I just wanted to be sure. And then, by the way, for the people listening, if you have any questions, send them into chat right now. I'm going to ask Rich one more question, and then we're going to open it up for questions from you guys. Rich, I wanted to ask you, in this kind of economy and these staggering job unemployment figures, can you give us some advice on how to stay optimistic? And during this time, there's a lot of fear and anxiety right now, and particularly with so many people being on the job market. Some people have said to me, why should I even try? My God, I'm going to be competing against everybody in my company. We all just got furloughed. What can we do to help people stay optimistic while going through this, at the same time being realistic?
It's a good question. And it's a question I struggle with myself. I mean, I can say that there are still searches going on, that, you know, there are the searches that we do more and more, even before the pandemic, have gotten more specialized and more, you know, when we say we're looking for a unicorn, we're often looking for a very specific combination of skill sets. And if you're not that person, there's nothing I can do. But if you are that person, you're probably going to get the job, whether there's 20 other people doing what you do out of work or 220 people out of work looking for a job. So, you know, I think good people will land. But other than that, and by the way, just because you see a major media company laying off hundreds of people does not mean they are not hiring very specific positions at the same time. So don't just assume, well, that company must not be hiring because they're laying off, because the problems that they were trying to solve by filling positions before the pandemic, those problems are now tenfold. So hiring the right person to solve those problems is 10 times more important than it was before this all started. Then, you know, so there's still hiring going on for sure.
Rich, that's excellent. Boy, that's very good. Um, I'm sure that I think that is just fantastic what you just said, and I think it's something everybody needs to hear right now. There is still hiring going on. It appears like it's all doom and gloom, but it's just happening. You don't know. They're shifting maybe positions and titles, but work will resume in whatever fashion that is. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Now I have a question for you. Earlier, you had mentioned about that your company does executive placement. At what? Give us an idea. Is that, say, VP and above? Is it SVP? Is it CEO? What is there? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So normally we do, our sweet spot is probably SVP to EVP and then C-level positions. We'll often do vice president level positions especially for clients we've worked with a lot. The business model of retained search, and this doesn't apply just to my company, it doesn't make a lot of sense for companies to spend the money on us for positions at mid-level VP, junior level VPs, or below directors, managers. It just doesn't make sense.
Right.
So that's generally where we tend to land. But I'd say SVP, EVP is probably the bulk of our practice.
Got it. Okay, good. We have a question about, and this I've heard from other people too. Sometimes positions at the executive level are likely to be filled before they're even posted on LinkedIn. Um, how do you like get on the radar of some of these companies looking for people? And I want to add a second part of that question, which is I've heard some people think that when jobs are posted, it's just a formality to be sure that they have spread that inclusion net wide enough. And so how can we be sure that we're hitting the job search at the exact right time?
You know, that's a great question, and there's no easy answer to those questions. I mean, I think that there's an obligation at a lot of these companies that jobs get posted, even if they're going to promote from within, or even if the hiring executive knows who they ideally want to hire. And at the same time, they're often searches go on for 6 months before we get brought in, and they've been posted the whole time, and then we get brought in. So, knowing people at the company, I don't have a specific answer to, obviously when a position opens up, a company's generally going to try to fill it without hiring a search firm because it's much more cost effective. You just have to be on the radar of the people. That's social networking, that's having friends, that's hearing about that kind of stuff. There are in any community, especially in the entertainment industry, there are those people that are just the ones that we always call to say, who do you know, who do you like, because they're great, they love giving us people. You want to be on their radar. You want to kind of find out who are the people that are always, are the go-to resources for executives, and make sure whether it's an agent or whether it's just an elder statesperson in the community or a former employee that's beloved by this company, so that you can be on their radar, so that when everyone goes to those people, you're on their list.
Got
But
it.
I don't know that I could add more before other than that.
No, it's a good answer. By the way, I've seen this with a couple of tech companies. Someone will send me, they say, oh, this job just popped up. And then they never fill it. And then 3 months later, it goes away, but it pops up again. And then it pops up again. When you see that kind of behavior within a company, should you pay any attention to that, or just realize that the hiring people must be overwhelmed, or maybe they interviewed a bunch of people, didn't quite find the right one? But are you familiar with this, where you'll see it posted, it goes away, it comes back, same job, and it's never filled?
Yeah, and it could be 1,000 things. I think that the short answer is you're right to just not read anything into it. It just is what it is. It could be that they got down to an offer and they decided to pull it, and then the person didn't accept the job. It could be that in interviewing they realized that what they thought they needed is actually not what they needed, and they sort of are retrenching on it. It could be that the hiring executive left and now they're putting that position on hold. It could be a million things. It is what it is.
Got it. And also, I heard it could be that they adjusted the salary or the comp package, and then they had to repost it for that. We had a question from someone talking about on the resume, the skills area.
Yeah.
That's a place to put, any special languages, any particular software. How important is that skills to you? Do you look at that when you're doing a deeper dive into a search?
I mean, generally no hard and fast answer. Generally at the level that we're dealing with, more senior level, the skills are not as important. I think to me, skills are sort of hard and fast, like computer programs. If you're an Avid editor or Final Cut, or whatever other languages, that's super important. The things that are the soft skills of your skills are managing, leading. That's like setting up a dating profile and saying I'm funny and I'm cute, and I'm like, well, I don't really take any account to what you think. So I would say if you think that the jobs that you do require certain skills like computer programs or language proficiencies
Right.
that you want to make sure that you have, that's super valuable. If not, I would just take it off.
Yep. Okay. Totally agree. And then I just want to go back and reiterate something that you said, because a question was posed about it. So on the resume itself, I would advise people, just because in the interest of keeping it to 2 pages or so, not to go back. If you've been in the industry a long time, maybe don't go back more than say 10 or 15 years, depending on what how many bullet points you have for each job. But on LinkedIn, as you said, you can go back a little further. If you've had some earlier jobs, it's okay to list them on LinkedIn. That's the
Yeah.
place to do it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to reiterate. Let's see what else we have. Oh, this is a great question. What if you have two careers? I have a friend who's an actor and a producer, but she also wants to get into communications, and other people are, especially producers. Producers tend to have other jobs. So what do you do? Do you recommend a particular thing rather than just, as you said, doing two completely separate resumes? Do you recommend a way to integrate those skills but be clear what it is you're looking for? How do you advise people when they do two things?
It's not my world. I would normally say it's I look to career coaches and career counselors to answer those questions, because for me, if I'm filling a job, I'm looking for the resume that most speaks to the specific job. The challenge, if you're sort of foot in two worlds, is what you don't want to communicate is, and if something better in the other world comes along, I'm going to leave you and do something else, or I'm half committed to the one world that you're specifically looking for. So, I don't have a good answer to that other than, is there an overarching story of your career that encompasses those two things without sort of putting them against each other? Then I would try to tell that overarching story. But I don't know that there's an easy answer. I get
Right.
that it's a dance everybody has to do.
Yeah, excellent. You're right. Because if it looks like you yourself can't decide, how's the reader going to decide where to place you or have confidence that that's the right choice?
Yeah.
Okay, before we wrap it up, let me ask you, Rich, is there one thing maybe I had neglected to ask you, or something about the inner world of search, or something about resumes, anything that maybe I neglected to ask that you want to be sure that our listeners hear from you on?
Two things come to mind as you say it, and I think some of this you covered in your PDF, but I would say a big, I think, mistake that I see a lot of people make is they've been at a job for 7 years and it just lists them as, vice president of whatever for those whole 7 years. Like, why, you were vice president for 7 years, really? And they'll say, well, no, I came in as a coordinator and then I became a director and a manager. I didn't want to, and often they'll say they either didn't want to list that because they didn't know how to kind of put all of that on one resume, or they kind of want it to look like, look, I've been a VP for longer, or create an appeal. And I always say that's such a huge mistake, because to me, when I'm looking at a resume, I'm sort of wondering, what value did you bring to the company? How can I tell there's value to the company? Well, if the company promoted you, there's no better sign that you were adding value to the company than the fact that they promoted you. So to see director to VP to SVP or whatever that is such a calling card for you to show that you were valued by the company before you left. So not only would I say it's not a bad thing, it's actually a very good thing. So I would really, really add that. And then the other thing I would just say about executive recruiters is I think people intellectually know this, but maybe don't get it, is if I'm on the phone with you talking about a position, whether I called you or you called me, I want you to be perfect. I want you to get the job. It is better for me to close the search tomorrow than to close the search 6 months from now. So if I'm telling you that you don't fit the criteria, please know that we as recruiters are not being elitist. We're not being gatekeepers and we're doing it because we're just jerks. We're doing it because that's what we're getting paid to do. And nothing would make me happier than to say, Madelyn, you're perfect. You got the job and I get paid now and I can go on to the next thing. If I'm saying no, it's almost always because that's what they're paying me to do. And just know that, I would say make the case. If someone says no to you, make the case why you disagree. And if they push back again, value the long-term relationship with that recruiter over the short-term. No, I'm going to turn that no into a yes, because if I have to spend 20 minutes on the phone saying no 4 times, honestly, I'm going to want to call you less for the next position that you actually may be right for. If you push back respectfully, you still get the no, and then you just say, I get it. Hey, maybe I can recommend some people. I'm more likely to call you for the next one.
Oh, great. Fantastic advice, just on all levels. Rich, I cannot thank you enough for doing this. And if anybody has any additional questions, please send them to me and I'll get them to Rich or get you an answer. And we just wish everybody the best of luck in this search and this journey. I know it's not easy, but hopefully these little Zoom sessions will help answer some questions. So Rich, thank you
Absolutely.
so much.
Of course, happy to do it. It was great to talk.
All right, see you later. Bye, everybody. Thank